Thank you, Dov. So good morning, everybody. We're on page 938, and we start the book of Devarim. Right? Devarim. And this is unique in terms of the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, in terms of the Chumashim. This is unique. These are the words of Moshe. Eila hadvarim asher diber Moshe el kol Yisroel. These are the words that Moshe spoke to kol Yisroel. This is a compilation of the speeches of Moshe. At the same time, this is Torah. And Torah, we understand to mean as dictated by Hashem. Yet throughout this book, we don't find so much Vaydaber Hashem Moshe Lemor, right? Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, but we have Moshe speaking in first person, right? Va'ekach, and I took Rashi Shabtechem, right? I did this, va'atzaveh etchem, and I commanded you at that time. So it sounds like it's Moshe speaking and not Hashem speaking. So is this Torah like the rest of the Torah, like Bereshit, Shemot, Vayikra, Bamidbar? What is the status of this book? So there are a number of different approaches. The approach that I will present is, these are the words of Moshe. But Moshe said a lot of things. These are not... let me backtrack. Mount Sinai. Moshe came down with the Torah from Mount Sinai? No. What did he come down with? The tablets, the luchot. Okay? So, where do we get the Torah from? According to Orthodox Jewish belief. I'm sorry? Moshe. When? How? Where?
He got it from the Gvura.
So over the course, either over the course of the 40 years or at the end of the 40 years, God dictated the words of the Torah to Moshe, and he wrote them down. And those are the words of the Torah that we've had passed down meticulously for thousands of years. Meticulously for thousands of years. I remember when I was teaching in Israel, so there was a fellow who had been a priest of sorts, minister, I forget exactly what it was, who converted to Judaism. And he came and he spoke. And one of the points that he made, which was such a powerful point, he said that, I don't recall the exact numbers, but he said in Christianity, they are very proud of the fact that of the New Testament, there are only, and it was hundreds, there are only, whatever number it was, I'll randomly picking, there are only 200 versions of the text of the New Testament. And of those 200 versions, there's only, again, I'm picking a random number, I don't remember exactly what it was, 40 or 50 which affect a fundamental principle of belief of Christianity. And that's pretty good for an old document. And now compare that to us. How many variations do we have? No. Well, there are a few. Is it written Malay or is it written Chaser? Is it written full or is it written in a shorter version? Meaning the word Shalom. We can spell it full, Shin, Lamed, Vav, Mem. Or we can spell it Chaser, lacking, Shin, Lamed, Mem. Either way, it's pronounced the same way. Either way, it means the same thing. The question is in the writing. When something becomes plural in Hebrew, there's a Yud Mem that we add on to make it plural. Right? Chafetz is an object, chafetzim. Now it could be, right? We have in the Torah the word pilag shim, concubines. It can be written full, yud and mem, or without the yud and the mem. So the Torah that we have was and is meticulously preserved and passed down. Those are the words that Hashem spoke to Moshe at the Ohel Moed in the Mishkan, and Moshe transcribed it. Moshe wrote it down. How about Devarim, the book of Devarim? So these are Moshe's words, right? But then are they the status of Torah or not? So again, the approach that I align with most is these are Moshe's speeches. These are Moshe's speeches. Now, Moshe made many speeches. Ultimately, it was these words that Moshe spoke that Hashem said should become part of Torah. And therefore, from Moshe's speeches, God dictated these to be the words of Torah that comprise the book of Devarim. So Devarim is the words of Moshe which became Torah, as God said, yes, those speeches, those words are and should be added in, right, written in as Torah. But isn't it fascinating? When Hashem spoke to Moshe about going to Paro, what was Moshe's response?
I cannot speak.
Right? Lo ish dvarim.
Not me.
Right? Not me. Why? I'm not a speaker. I'm not. Who am I to go before Paro? Right? And what was God's response? Who gives a person a mouth? Who gives a person their words? And look at what Moshe has become. Look at what Moshe has become. The whole 5th book of the Torah is Eila Hadvarim Asher Diber Moshe El Kol Yisroel. These are the words that Moshe spoke to all of Israel, Be'eva HaYarden, across the Jordan. So the person who couldn't speak, and Hashem says, who gives you the mouth? Who gives you the words? Has become the most eloquent speaker of our nation. Right? He has become the heart and soul that's verbalized in the Sefer of Devarim. Let's go a little bit further. Let's take that first pasuk. Aaron bechavot.
אלה הדברים אשר דיבר משה אל כל ישראל בעבר הירדן, במדבר, בערבה, מול סוף, בין פרן ובין תופל, ולבן וחצרות ודי זהב.
One more pasuk.
11 יום חורף, דרך הר שעיר, עד חודש ברנע.
Good. Let's take that in English now. So in English,
These are the words that Moshe spoke to all Israel on the other side of the Jordan, concerning the wilderness, concerning the Arabah, opposite the sea of reeds, between Paran and Tophel and Lavan, and Hazeroth and Dihaz-Zahab, 11 days from Horeb by Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea.
okay. So we're listing a whole bunch of places over here. Okay. Moshe is going to give some rebuke. Right? We're across the Jordan. Moshe's not going in with us. Okay? But he's got to set the nation on course of where we are heading. And he's giving them rebuke. He speaks, Rashi points out, El Kol Yisroel, to the entire nation. Right? Because he was concerned. If he would have rebuked some of them, the others would have said, oh yeah, well, why didn't you say this? Why didn't you say that? So what did Moshe do?
Includes.
Everyone's there. Right? No one can say, well, if I was there, I would have put my foot, right? El Kol Yisrael. But then we list all these places. Now the English softened it up a little bit. Right? We said concerning the Arabah. But what does Ba'arava mean?
In.
Right? In or at the Arava. Mol Suf, across from the Yam Suf. Bein Paran, Uvein Tofel, Vilavan, the Chatzerot, the Di Zahav. These are not, some of them are places, some of these are not places. If you want to follow with me in Rashi, in the first column, about 2/3 of the way down. Bein Paran, Uvein Tofel, Vilavan, Ar Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, Chazano kol mikra. We've gone through the entire scripture. V'lo matzino makom. And there is no place, Sheshmo Tofel, that its name is Tofel. Vilavan. And there is no place that its name is Lavan. So what's happening over here? Ela hochichan. He's rebuking them. Al hadvarim. These are names, words that refer to incidents. What is Tofel? Shetaflu, that they contended about that man, Shehu Lavan, which is white. And they said, we can't take this crazy type of food anymore. Right? The man was very strange. The man was ingested, but it didn't come out. Right? Why is that?
It was completely nutrition.
Well, more than nutrition. Right? There was a curse. There was a curse on the land. Right? Because of Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, there was a curse on the land. The land became this mixture of Tov and Ra, of good and bad. And whatever comes from the land, our body needs to separate. Take out the good and eliminate the bad. The blessing that one says after using the restroom, the blessing of thanks that one says is Rofei kol basar. The blessing ends off. Right? Rofei kol basar, you heal all flesh, because, as we know, if the body is not eliminating the waste, the person will die. Toxic shock, the person will die. Umafli la'asot. And it's pella, it's wondrous what you do. What is the wonder? How the body extracts what it needs and utilizes what it needs and rids itself of the rest. But that's all as a result of the curse on the earth. But the man comes from the heavens. So the man was not part of that whole klala, of that whole curse. And therefore the man was completely ingested. That's Tofel, and that is Lavan. I'm sorry?
No bathroom in the desert. There was no bathroom in the desert, so.
Yeah. Yeah. And Paran, but what is Paran a reference to? Paran is a reference to, that we know the place. That was the sin of the Meraglim, of the spies. Okay? So, there's an incredible kleyakar that applies to the days that we're in now. We'll come to soon. But first of all, we see right away, when Moshe is giving rebuke, how does he give this rebuke?
Indirectly.
Right? Gently. Yeah. Indirectly. He alludes to missteps. He's letting them know, with all these missteps that you've made, God is still with you. But don't repeat these mistakes. But you see, right? The way to get someone to do something, right? You yell, shout, right? The person recedes, right? If one is gentle, one is careful, one is respectful, then the words can be received. There's a pasuk in Mishlei which says, don't rebuke a fool, pentisne, because he'll hate you. Rebuke a chacham, a wise person,
Love you.
and he will love you. Right? So the Vilna Gaon explains that that's not saying what you think it's saying. Right? The simple understanding is, who do I rebuke? Well, that person's a hothead. That person's a fool. I'm not gonna. If I speak to that person, right, nothing's gonna be accomplished. They'll hate me. Right? It's gonna get worse. I'll be throwing them fuel into the fire. Here's a person, a wise person, or with a settled mind. I can rebuke that person, give them constructive criticism, and they'll appreciate it. They'll thank me for pointing it out to them, and they'll love me. The Vilna Gaon says, yes, but there's a lot more than that. It's telling you, he says, how to rebuke a person. He's talking about that one person. If you rebuke that person as a fool, what'd you do? What were you thinking? What's the matter with you? Right? Do you have a head on your shoulders? Right? Do you use your brain? Right? If that's how you approach the person as a fool, then they'll hate you. How should you approach that person? Approach that person as a chacham, as a wise person. Right? I got a phone call yesterday from someone from a previous neighborhood who's having an issue. An issue with, I don't want to go into details.
Yeah, no.
Right? But, and he wanted to really unleash against this person. And I said to him, maybe this is why they did it. Maybe that's why they did it. Maybe this is why this is what they were thinking. Right? Approach them with, I was surprised that this is the way it was done, right? And in the future, please let's make sure that we do it in a different way, right? If you come out with your guns blazing, right? You're disrespectful, you're an idiot, you're a fool, nothing's accomplished. You approach the person as a chacham, as a wise person, right? In Yiddish we say pas nicht, right? Pas nicht means it's not befitting, right? A person like you, it's not befitting you, right? It's beneath you. So you're not this, you're there. So you're building the person up as you are identifying the behavior that is remiss. Rabbi Twersky tells a beautiful story that one year Rosh Hashanah, he was a young boy. So there was a visiting rabbi who was there with his father at the house. And Rosh Hashanah afternoon, he played this visiting rabbi a game of chess. His father called him in afterwards and said, "Pas nicht. On Rosh Hashanah, the day of judgment, it's not a day to be playing chess. Right? Pas nicht, it's beneath you." So he built him up as he let him know the behavior that was incorrect. And then, as he was leaving his father's study, his father said to him, "Did you win?" That's the way to give the reproof. Right? So Moshe is here rebuking the entire nation, but with respect, with gentleness, without rubbing their face in it. Jan, you want to say something before?
Well, the first thing is that even though he's addressing everyone, Hashem himself deemed that this particular group was not responsible for some of those actions because they were excluded from being banned from the land.
Okay.
So it's interesting. It's like Moshe is being very preventive, even though he's including them all.
Okay. Yeah. Dov?
Do you think he learned a lot from the rock, and this applies over here?
Okay. That's a nice thought, Dov.
And then the other thing is, it seems like the theme of the last 3 classes is the power of words. Every
How about that?
time. I mean, if you
How about that?
go
This is
back
the
and you
book of
think about
Devarim,
No, but
right? These are the
previously,
words.
you know,
And
like
Bamidbar
Bilam's
has the same root
words.
as Daber, speak. Yeah,
And so
Yeah.
every time you've been talking about that, that's the most
yeah,
powerful thing.
yeah, yeah. You know, we view words as being more powerful than actions. Words is touching a spiritual level, right? Actions are more base. Absolutely. The Kli Yakar, one of the classic commentators, he learns differently. He learns, well, again, Bein Paran Uvein Tofel, right? Between Paran and between Tofel. What's that? According to Rashi, he asks, what's that between and between? What is that referring to? So Rashi said Paran is the Meraglim, is the spies. We all agree with that. Tofel, Rashi said, is the man. He learns that Tofel is a reference to idolatry. If that's the case, so which sin? What's it referring to then?
The ego.
The sin of the golden calf,
Oh, I
the egel,
would have thought Baal Peor.
right? And he says as follows: Bain Paran Ubain Tofel is that we are stuck in between those two sins. What was the sin of Meraglim? What was the sin of the Meraglim? We didn't trust in Hashem, right? And we said God must be hating us. That's why he wants to bring us to that land. And we mentioned last year, the week before that, I remember the idea of projection, right? What I'm feeling is what I project onto others, right? And there was this enmity amongst us, and we projected that onto God. And what did the sin of the Meraglim, the sin of the spies, what did that lead to? Tisha B'Av. Meaning what? It was on the night of Tisha B'Av, on the 9th of Av, that we heard the report from the spies, and we had this B'chiyah Shel Chinam. We had this unwarranted cry. The cry that we don't want to go into the land of Israel. And that became established as the night of crying for generations. Crying over our being sent out of Israel. If we were crying that we didn't want to go in, it's because we didn't have that connection that we need to feel to the land of Israel. How do we correct that? By crying over the loss of Israel, by crying over the destruction of the temples, by crying over the exiles that resulted from that. And as we were discussing before, right, Spain, right, and Poland, right, you see, right, actually the expulsion from Spain in 1492 was on Tisha B'Av. That's when the edict was signed. Right? And that's been our long, tragic, difficult history. Time spent in Poland. That's all because of the Chorban, the destruction of the temple, and that's all going back to the sin of the Meraglim, of the spies. Now, the sin of the golden calf, what did that lead to? What did the sin of the golden calf lead to?
Loss of the law for a few, like 8 weeks, 10 weeks.
When Moshe came down from Har Sinai.
He lost the tablet.
Right? And he saw the sin of the golden calf. What did he do? He broke the tablets. What date is that?
It's the 17th, I think.
The 17th of Tammuz. The fast that we had two weeks and a few days ago, on the fast of the 17th of Tammuz, that was the date of the breaking of the tablets. What else was that the date of?
Breach of the wall.
The breach of the walls.
Jerusalem.
Both of them were the stones being broken.
Oh, great.
Both of them were the stones being broken. The sin of the golden calf led to the tablets being broken. Moshe came down, those stones were broken. And then hukva, there was bikiyat avanim, Kliyakar says, and huvka'a chomat ha'ir va'avaneha. The wall of the city and its stones were broken. The 3 weeks, as it's called, the 3 weeks of mourning that we are now in the midst of, starts with Shivasar B'Tammuz and ends with Tisha B'Av.
So what is
It's called it's called Bein HaMitzarim,
Wow.
between the troubles, between the calamities. And the Kliyaka says that's what's alluded to when the Pasuk said Bein Paran Ubein Tofel. That we are stuck in between the sin of Paran and the sin of Tofel. We are sandwiched in between those two calamities. And that is what binds us. We're sort of trapped in between. How is that? So he goes further. If a person or a nation is going into battle, either they're having divine assistance, they're having help from God,
Where they trust their power.
or they have this camaraderie amongst one another. Right? If we have this help from God, then God will bring us the victory. If we're not having direct help from God, but God is leaving it to teva, to nature, to natural effects, whatever happens. So then, if we are working together, then we'll be victorious. If we're not working together, taking care of one another, carrying one another, supporting one another, so then we don't have much hope. He says these two sins of Paran, of the Chet HaEgel and the Meraglim, they represent these two aspects. By the sin of the golden calf, what happened? We turned away from God. This is the power that brought you up from Egypt. We turned away from God. And by the Meraglim, he says, by the spies, we said before, right, that if we're projecting hatred onto God, that's because Rashi says projection, ma debilibech al rachamach. That which you feel in your heart, that you'll put onto someone else. Right? And there was this lack of unity amongst one another, amongst ourselves. And therefore there was this enmity, so we projected that onto God. So what is the sandwich that leaves us vulnerable in the middle? When we are turning away from Hashem and turning away from one another. That is the Bain. So it's between Paran and Tofel. It's between the golden calf and the spies. It's between, again, the golden calf is the breach of the walls, the 17th of Tammuz. The spies is Tisha B'Av. the 9th of Av. And that was caused by turning away from God, turning away from one another. And how does that leave us? Bein hamitzarim. That leaves us vulnerable. That leaves us open to all of these tragedies that come about.
That's also giving us more time in exile too.
And then he goes, the next pasuk is Achad Asar Yom Mechorev. 11 days from Chorev. Rashi says, Moshe said, Re'u Mashe Garamtem. Look what you caused. The whole travel from Chorev to Kadesh Barnea via Har Seir was 11 days. And you did it in 3 days. God was rushing you to get you there. And instead, it ended up taking how long to get to the land of Israel? 40 years. But the Kli Yakar points out, Achad Asar Yom, 11 days. He says we have 11 days every year. We have 11 days every year where we mourn for the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. What are those 11 days? Well, we have 9 days from the first day of Av until the 9th of Av. Right? This year, the 9th of Av is on Shabbos. It gets pushed off. Right? So we're going to have Mariv and Eicha reading this Saturday night at 9 p.m. And then Sunday morning, we have the usual keynote with lots of explanations of the different lamentations. And then we show different films at 5 o'clock. After our Poland trip, the group that went to Poland, so there was a lot of agonizing, a lot of debate over the role that the Poles played during those years. The Poles themselves were tremendously persecuted by the Nazis. There are 3 million Poles that died during that time. Right? 3 million Poles. 3 million out of 33 or 30, I think 33 million Poles at the start of the war.
That's like 9%
Right?
of their...
There were 3 million Jews from Poland out of the basically 3 million Jews that were in Poland. Right? And there was a lot. There are many different views, and it was getting we were really getting into this quite a bit. So I asked the person who led our trip if he could recommend a film for us to watch, and Natalie and I previewed it, and we're going to show it here at 5 o'clock on Tisha B'av. It's about it's very powerful, very painful, very powerful.
5 p.m. or 5 a.m.?
5 p.m.
Are the
Yeah.
3 million Poles
Yeah.
and 3 million Jews one and the same? Or are they two
No.
different? Okay.
No.
What's the name of the, what's the name?
It's called Two Barns. Two Barns. It's very powerful. And we're going to have it. Most of those who went on the trip, or if they're able to come, will be joining us also. And it's open for everyone, of course. I'm going to have a discussion afterwards, just about it and the takeaways. So all are welcome. So again, 9 p.m. Saturday night for the reading of Eicha, Mariv and the reading of Eicha, and in the morning 8 o'clock we have the special Tisha B'av davening. It's without tefillin on Sunday morning, only tefillin at mincha later on in the day, and at 5 p.m. we'll be showing this film. But there are 11 days that we mourn for the temple. There's these 9 days that we're in now. There is Shivasa B'Tammuz, right, which is when the walls were breached. And there also is Asara B'Tevet, the 10th of Tevet. That is when the siege began on Jerusalem, that 3 years later led to the breach of the walls, and 3 weeks later led to the destruction of the temple. So the Kli Yakar says this Achad Asar Yom is also a hint, an allusion to the 11 days of mourning that we have as a result of being Bein Paran ubein Tofel, of being stuck between these calamities and what led to these calamities and the result of these calamities, and we're still stuck Bein HaMitzarim. And we have 11 days that are focused on these tragedies, on this Bein HaMitzarim. Yeah.
So I'm confused. Before the Meraglim, it didn't seem like there was this lack of unity that people were infighting. In fact, they were so trusting of the Meraglim that they were easily led. I mean, they were...
Well, they were trusting the Meraglim. They weren't trusting of Caleb. They weren't trusting of Yoshua. They weren't trusting of Moshe. They weren't trusting of God. Right? So that's how the Kliyak. I agree with you that we don't see clearly that there was this lack of unity, but that's how the Kliyakar interprets it. Okay, let's go a little further. So let's continue on. Right? It was in the 40th. Let's take it in English for a little bit, and then we'll get to a puzzle I want to get to. So I want to continue. Should I want to take it in English from verse 3? On page 939.
Okay. Oh. It was in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first of the month, when Moses spoke to the children of Israel, according to everything that Hashem commanded him to them. After he had smitten Sihon, king of Amorite, who dwelt in Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan, who dwelt in Ashtaroth, in Edrei. On the other side of the Jordan, in the land of Moab, Moshe began explaining this Torah, saying...
Okay, and Rashi points out that Moshe was afraid, if it was before these conquests, they would say, well, what has Moshe really done for us, after all? But Moshe had brought them right up until the point of entering the land of Israel. Continue, Hashem
our God spoke to us in Horeb, saying, enough of your dwelling by this mountain. Turn yourselves around and journey and come back to the Amorite mountain and all its neighbors in the Arabah, on the mountain and in the lowland, and in the south and at the seacoast, the land of the Canaanite and the Lebanon, until the great river, the Euphrates River. See, I have given the land before you. Come and possess that land that Hashem swore to your forefathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give them and their children after them.
Amazing. So they're there looking across at the land. Right? This is the land. 40 years later. Right? 210 years of slavery later. Right? But now the promise is about to be fulfilled. And then Moshe says, right, Pasuk Tet. Let's go in Hebrew first.
Is that 9?
Yeah. In Hebrew? Pasuk Tet. V'amar lechem.
ואומר לכם בעת ההיא לאמור, לא אוכל לבדי שאת אתכם. השם אלוהיכם ירבה אתכם, ואינכם היום ככוכבי השמיים לרוב. אדוני אלוהי אבותיכם יוסף עליכם ככם 1000 פעמים, ויברך אתכם כאשר דיבר לכם. איכה אשא לבדי תוככם עם מעשייכם וריבכם. הבו לכם אנשים חכמים ונבונים וידועים לשבטיכם.
Good. In English from verse 9. Linda, you got it?
Sure. I said to you at that time, saying, I cannot carry you alone. Hashem your God has multiplied you, and behold, you are today like the stars of the heaven in abundance. May Hashem, the God of your forefathers, add to you 1,000 times yourselves, and bless you as he has spoken of you. How can I alone carry your countenances, your burdens, and your quarrels?
Okay. One more. Yeah, Habu.
Provide for yourselves distinguished men who are wise, understanding, and well known to your tribes, and I shall appoint them as your heads.
Now look back to the Hebrew for a minute. Pasuk Yud Bet. In English it's how. In Hebrew, how is it? Eicha. Eicha. Right? And in fact, on this Shabbat, when we lane this pasuk, we have the usual truck of the Torah. Right? Hashem Elokei Avotechem Yosef Alechem Kachem Elef Pamim V'Yorech Etchem Kasher Diber Lachem. That's the usual Torah reading. And then we change Eicha Esa Levadi Tarchachem Masachem V'Rivchem. We change the tune. Then we go back. Habulachem Anashim Chachamim Unavonim. What happened? We switched to the tune of Eicha. And you hear that tune of Eicha, it's haunting. It's walking out of our homes. It's going into exile.
And it's bane and bane. It's in between.
Yeah.
Cheryl, that's very interesting.
Now, this Eicha, right, of course, Megillat Eicha, the book of Eicha that we're reading Saturday night, begins Eicha Salazona, right? Kirya Nemana. Right? Eicha, how did this happen? How did this happen? There's another place in the Torah where we have that same lettering, if not that same pronunciation. Look back on page 16 in our Chumashim. Perek Gimel, Pasuk Tet. Well, let's go to the top of that page already. Vatitein gam leisha ima vayochal. Chava took from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and she ate, and she gave it also to her husband, and he ate. And their eyes, vatipakachna einei shteim, their eyes were opened up, vayedu, and they knew, ki erumim heim, that they were naked. Rashi brings the sages that they had that one mitzvah, and they were now naked from that mitzvah. They knew they were naked also. They actually now sensed that they were naked. They were naked all along, but they didn't sense it before. But now there were different feelings, different senses. Vayiparu, and they sewed alei te'ina, a fig leaf, and they made for themselves chagarot, like belts, aprons. There are those that say that the Eitz Hadat, the tree of knowledge, was the fig tree, because that was the only one that allowed them to take their leaves to make this garments. Vayishmu et kol Hashem Elokim v'talech began, and they heard the sound of God's presence there in the gan, the Ruach Hayom, towards the evening. Vayitchabei ha'adam v'ishto v'mnei Hashem Elokim, and they hid. Adam and his wife hid from before God, betoch, amongst the Eitz Hagan, the trees of the garden. Vayikra Hashem Elokim al Adam, and Hashem Elokim called to Adam, Vayomer lo, and he said to him, Ayeka, Aleph, Yud, Chaf, Hey. Same exact letters, same exact word as Eicha. What does Ayeka mean? Where are you? Rashi explains simply, of course God knew where they were, but in order to enter the conversation gently, so God first asked, where are you? Right? Similarly, by Cain, he said, where is Hevel, your brother? Right? By Bilam, who are these people with you? God knows the answer, but he enters into that conversation. It is a different shorish.
Different shores, that's
Yeah.
what I was thinking.
Yes and no.
This
Right?
means how and this means where are you?
Okay.
And it's like Aleph Yud Chaf.
Yes.
Aleph Yud Hey.
Yes. Fair enough. So Hashem saying, we'll come in a second to that, Ruthie. So Hashem saying to Adam, right, simply, where are you? Let's start the conversation. On a deeper level, where are you?
Where do you think?
What have you become? Look at yourself. Look at what you're doing. You were created, called Yitzir Kapav, the creation of the hands, so to speak, of God. And now you're hiding behind a tree? What's become of you? Where are you? Look what has become of you. Look where you are, and look where you were. Ayeka. And the Bali Musar, the ethicists say, if a person doesn't ask themselves, Ayeka, where am I? Where could I be? Where should I be? And where am I? If we don't ask ourselves, Ayeka, where am I? Then what results from that is Eicha, is how. How did this come about? Look where we are. If we don't ask ourselves, Ayeka, when we're along the way, then